All right, so let's jump right into this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the 2024 U.S. presidential race.
Yep.
As you probably know, it's surprisingly close.
Yeah.
And we have this insightful article that analyzes all the factors that are making it such a nail-biter.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it on the surface and think it should be a clear win for one side,
Right.
but it's actually way more complex than that.
So break it down for us. What are we missing here?
Well, historically speaking, when incumbent parties have had low approval ratings, they tend to really struggle.
Really?
Yeah, and this pattern goes back decades.
Okay, so how has this played out in the past?
Well, since the 1940s, only one incumbent party candidate has won with an approval rating below 50%.
Wow.
And that was Harry Truman back in 1948.
Oh, wow.
He was sitting at a dismal 40%.
Jeez. So basically unheard of for an incumbent to win with low approval.
It's rare to say the least.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for the incumbent party this time around, Biden's approval ratings are hovering around 39%, according to Gallup. And that's actually even lower than Vice President Harris's 45%.
Wow. History's not on their side.
It's not looking great.
So besides history working against them, what's causing Biden's approval rating to be so low?
Right. So the article points to a couple of key factors.
Oh.
Concerns about the economy and foreign policy.
Okay.
When you look at the economic side, we've seen GDP growth.
Right.
But things like personal income growth are lagging. And, voters care about their bottom line.
Feeling financially secure, for sure.
Absolutely.
And what about on the foreign policy side of things?
Well, we've got ongoing challenges in Ukraine and the situation in Gaza and the complexities at the border. These are multifaceted issues, but voters often just point the finger at the president, even when it's a lot more complicated than that.
It's that whole the buck stops here mentality.
Exactly.
Okay, but there's another massive factor in this election we can't ignore.
You're talking about the Trump factor?
Yeah. It's like the elephant in the room, right? This article compares his influence to Reagan even.
It does. But it also argues that even Reagan's influence was nothing compared to what we see with Trump.
Wow.
He's made this race about himself in a way we've never seen before.
Interesting.
It's like he's using rallies, social media, everything he can to keep himself in the spotlight.
He definitely knows how to capture attention.
Oh, absolutely.
But the article also talks about this resistance to Trump.
Right.
I mean, it's not like everyone's excited for him to potentially come back.
Exactly. That's a key point. The article really highlights how much resistance there is to Trump, both within his own party and from Democrats and independents. And his approval ratings really tell the story.
So what are the numbers looking like?
Well, first of all, he never even reached a 50% approval rating during his entire presidency.
Oh, wow.
And his average was 41%, which is the lowest ever recorded, even lower than Jimmy Carter.
Really?
Yeah. This level of disapproval, especially from within his own party, is really unique historically.
So why are some Republicans hesitant to support him? What are they worried about?
Many Republicans are concerned about his style, what some would call demagoguery. Others are worried about the fact that he doesn't always stick to traditional conservative policy positions.
Okay.
And of course, there's the events of January 6th that casts a long shadow.
For sure. That was a turning point for a lot of people, regardless of party.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got Biden fighting against historical trends and Trump facing strong opposition.
Right.
Sounds like a recipe for a super close race.
It's definitely an interesting dynamic. And it leads to the question, will this election be decided by the usual political calculations?
Like the economy, foreign policy, party loyalty?
Exactly. Or will the deciding factor be Trump himself?
Will it all come down to his personality and the resistance he faces?
That is the big question, isn't it? And the article suggests that millions of voters might be making their decisions solely based on their feelings about Trump.
Wow.
Potentially putting that above traditional loyalties and policy concerns.
That's a huge statement. It sounds like we're in uncharted waters here.
We are. Yeah, it's really interesting to look at how this resistance within the GOP developed. It wasn't like it just popped up overnight.
So where did it start? Like, take us back.
Well, you can actually trace it all the way back to even before Trump won the Republican nomination in 2016.
Oh, wow.
There was already a pretty big chunk of the Republican establishment that was really skeptical of him.
What were their concerns back then?
Oh, they had a bunch of worries. Some were concerned about his rhetoric. They thought it bordered on demagoguery.
Right.
Others were uncomfortable with his policy stances, like on things like free trade and foreign intervention, where he kind of went against traditional conservative positions. And then, of course, some people just didn't like his behavior or his personal style.
Yeah, there were definitely some fundamental differences there right from the start.
For sure. And once he became president, those divisions just got even bigger.
So what happened during his presidency that really pushed those Republicans who were already wary of him over the edge?
Well, the article highlights a few key turning points.
Okay.
For some, it was his willingness to prioritize his own interests or even like perceived grievances over the party's.
Interesting.
And you can see that in how he handled endorsements, for example.
Okay.
He seemed to value loyalty to him over traditional party alliances.
So he wasn't really playing by the usual party rules.
Exactly. Others were bothered by his close ties to certain groups, like evangelical leaders,
Okay.
and his support for policies that seemed to contradict traditional conservative values, like when he shifted towards more isolationist foreign policy.
I see.
And of course, we can't forget about January 6th.
Right.
The attack on the Capitol was a major turning point. For a lot of Republicans who had been willing to kind of overlook or downplay some of Trump's more controversial actions,
Yeah.
January 6th was just too much. They saw it as a direct attack on democracy and a dangerous escalation of his rhetoric.
It makes sense that an event like that would force a lot of people to reevaluate things.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this resistance within the GOP is happening alongside the consistent opposition from Democrats and independents.
Right. We can't forget about that whole group of voters who have never been on board with Trump.
Exactly. So you end up with this really unprecedented situation where both sides of the political spectrum are incredibly polarized, and Trump is right at the center of it all.
It's almost like the entire political landscape revolves around him now.
That's exactly the point the article's making.
Okay.
It's saying that this election isn't following the normal political script. It's not about policy debates or party loyalty anymore. It's become a referendum on Trump himself.
Wow, it's pretty amazing and kind of scary to think that one person could have such a huge impact on politics.
Yeah, it really shows the power of personality in politics and how certain people can tap into those deep-seated anxieties and hopes that people have. But it also raises a really important question.
What's that?
Is this really all about Trump? Or are there bigger underlying issues at play here? Issues that are just being magnified because of him?
It's a really interesting question. Is it all about Trump, or is there something bigger going on?
Yeah, it's almost like he's brought all these existing divisions in our political system to the surface. Like they were always there, but maybe not so obvious before.
So it's almost like this election is a test for our democracy.
Exactly. It's forcing voters to really think about some fundamental questions.
Yeah.
Like, are they going to vote based on traditional party loyalty, even if they have some doubts about where their party's headed? Or will they focus on certain policies, like the economy or healthcare, even if the candidate doesn't completely align with their views on everything?
Or will they be driven by just one issue, like getting rid of Trump?
Right.
Or maybe supporting a specific social or economic policy,
Right.
even if it means ignoring other concerns.
That's the key point. The article argues that we're kind of moving away from those traditional political calculations.
Interesting.
It's almost as if the emotional stakes in this election are so high that they're overriding the usual factors that influence how people vote.
It's almost like voters are saying, this time it's personal.
Exactly. And that makes it really tough to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We've never seen this level of polarization before.
Right.
And it's hard to say what the long-term consequences will be.
So what does all this mean for our listeners?
Well, it means they have a tough but really important decision to make. This election is a test, not just for our political system, but for each individual voter.
Right.
It's a time to decide what really matters to us, what we're willing to compromise on, and what we absolutely won't stand for.
It's a good reminder that every vote matters.
Yeah.
And that we all play a part in shaping the future of the country.
Absolutely. And as we've been talking about, this election is unlike anything we've seen in recent history.
Yeah.
The stakes are incredibly high, and the outcome is far from certain.
So to our listeners, we say this. As you're figuring out who to vote for, think about what's most important to you.
Right.
What are your core values? What kind of future do you want to see for our country? And how will your vote help make that future a reality?
Those are the questions that will guide you to the right decision for you. And all of those individual decisions will ultimately determine the future of our nation.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the 2024 election.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been fascinating. and sometimes a little unnerving.
It has.
But we're definitely in for an exciting ride as we head towards Election Day.